The night sky above Earth looked calm, but behind that calm was a storm that no one wanted to admit. The leaders of Earth had made a deal they thought would save humanity. Strange alien traders had come offering protection, ships, and power. To many it felt like a gift, a chance for humanity to finally stand as equals among the stars. But Commander Ethan Cole felt a weight in his chest the first time he saw those ships. He stood on the docking bay floor, looking up at the towering hulls of the alien vessels, and even without touching them, he knew something was wrong. The metal looked aged, the markings faded, and the engines hummed with a sick, uneven sound. These were not gifts. They were traps. When Earth's government signed the agreement, the people cheered. Finally, they said, humanity would no longer be weak. Finally, no colony would feel unprotected. But inside the hearts of the soldiers and engineers who knew war, there was silence instead of celebration. Ethan walked through the corridors of one of the so-called battleships, running his gloved hand along the rusted walls. Rust on a warship that was supposed to cross the galaxy. He tried one of the weapon controls. It sparked once and went dark. The officers beside him exchanged uneasy looks. These were not ships of war. They were coffins painted to look like. Steeled on an end back on Earth, Dr. Laura Bennett, one of the youngest engineers in the space fleet, was furious when she saw the technical reports. She read page after page of broken systems, engines that could only run at half their speed, weapons older than her grandparents, and shields that barely flickered to life. She slammed her hand against the desk. "They tricked us," she whispered to herself, her voice shaking with both anger and shame. She thought about the colonies far from Earth, the men, women, and children who believed the fleet would keep them safe. With these ships, they would be defenseless, nothing more than targets waiting for predators. And Ethan had to stand in front of the council, trying to keep his voice steady as he explained the truth. "These ships are relics," he said. "They cannot fight. They cannot defend Earth or our colonies. The aliens saw us as desperate and they sold us scraps." The council members avoided his eyes. They knew it was true, but they hated hearing it out loud. The shame of being fooled spread through the room like poison. Some whispered about returning the ships. Others argued it was too late. They had paid. The galaxy already knew. Humanity was humiliated. News spread faster than light. Other alien races laughed at Earth. Stories went from world to world. The humans had been so eager to join the stars, they bought rust. They were too young, too naive, too desperate. What kind of species trusted strangers with their survival? At every station and colony, humans could hear the mocking voices of traitors and mercenaries. Even allies looked away, shaking their heads in pity. To them, humanity was not a rising power. Humanity was a joke. But humiliation has a way of lighting fires. Ethan sat alone in his quarters, staring at the broken report files. He remembered the faces of his crew, the pride they once carried now replaced with shame. He clenched his fists. If the galaxy thought humanity would stay down, they were wrong. He thought of the colonies, of the families who trusted him to protect them. He swore to himself that this betrayal would not be the end. It would be the beginning. On the other side of the city, Laura stayed awake night after night sketching designs. Her mind burned with anger but also with determination. She knew Earth could not rely on the scraps of others. They had to build something of their own, something no one could laugh at. She remembered her father's words. "If no one gives you a shield, then make one yourself." And she began to draw. Lines of metal, curves of steel, engines that could roar louder than any alien cruiser. She did not know if it was possible, but she knew they had no choice. The alien traders who sold the rusted ships celebrated their easy profit. They sat in their stations, drinking and laughing, certain that humanity would never recover. To them, Earth was weak and foolish, a planet to be played like children. But far away, in secret rooms and dark hangars, something else was beginning. Ethan and Laura were not the only ones who felt the fire. Across Earth, Soldiers, engineers, and scientists shared the same shame and the same dream. If they could not buy power, they would build it. If they could not trust others, they would trust themselves. In that moment, humanity changed. The betrayal that was meant to keep them weak instead gave them purpose. They would not forget the rusted ships. They would not forgive the mocking voices. They would not remain prey in the galaxy's eyes. Humanity had been fooled once, but never again. And though no one knew it yet, the first steps toward something greater had already been taken. Somewhere in the silence of the night, in the heart of a broken people, the idea of the Dreadnought was born. A warship like no other, a symbol not of weakness but of vengeance and strength. The galaxy had given humanity rust. Humanity would answer with fire. The shame of being tricked still hung heavy in the air. Every news channel replayed the same cruel headlines. Earth had been fooled. Earth had been sold junk. Earth was weak. At stations across the galaxy, alien traders laughed and pointed whenever they saw a human walk by. The once proud dream of humanity rising among the stars was now buried under layers of mockery, but not everyone was ready to give up. In quiet corners, in rooms where no one was watching, a spark was being lit. Commander Ethan Cole sat at a lonely table, staring at an empty glass. His crew had left him hours ago, too angry or too ashamed to talk. He thought of the broken ships lined up in the docks, hulks that could barely move. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the mocking faces of the alien traders who had smiled, while selling Earth the useless fleet. His jaw clenched as he remembered his oath to protect humanity. How could he protect them with rust and scrap? The thought burned inside him. At that same time, Dr. Laura Bennett sat in a small, cluttered workshop on the edge of Denver. Around her were scattered pieces of old engine parts, piles of notes, and holographic blueprints. Her mind refused to rest. She replayed the betrayal again and again. Humanity had begged for protection, and in return, the galaxy had handed them garbage. She felt her heart twist every time she thought about it, but then, her anger began to transform into something else. A question rose inside her. What if humanity didn't need to beg? What if they could build something better, something that would never leave them vulnerable again? When Ethan met Laura days later in a secure underground meeting room, the spark inside them grew brighter. He laid out the truth. Earth could not return the ships, and they could not fight with them. To do nothing would mean the end of colonies, of freedom, of trust. Laura listened carefully, her eyes sharp, her mind racing faster than her heartbeat. Then she told him of her dream. She spoke of a ship not borrowed, not bought, but created by human hands alone. It would not be weak like the relics. It would not crumble when fired upon. It would stand like a mountain against the stars. Ethan frowned at first. It sounded impossible. Humanity had never built anything on the scale of a galactic dreadnought. The cost would be high, the risk even higher. But when Laura projected her rough sketches into the air, massive engines layered, armor, heavy cannons, something inside him shifted. He felt a thrill, a dangerous hope. Maybe they had been tricked, but maybe that trick would give them the push they needed. They began to gather others who felt the same fire. Captain Ryan Blake, a veteran who had lost friends in battles where Earth's smaller ships were torn apart by alien cruisers, agreed without hesitation. Lieutenant Emma Ross, a brilliant strategist from New York, brought her sharp mind and unshakable will. Together, this small circle formed the first whispers of resistance, not against the galaxy but against the weakness that had held humanity down. They met in secret, speaking in hushed tones, passing coded messages through trusted hands. To the outside world, nothing had changed. Earth was still humiliated, still mocked. But in hidden hangars and dusty labs, work began. Laura sketched new engine systems day and night, her fingers stained with grease and ink. Ethan reached out to his most loyal officers, urging them to prepare for something greater. Every person they brought into the plan carried the same mixture of anger and determination. It wasn't just about building a ship. It was about proving something. Humanity had always been underestimated. They were seen as too young, Too fragile, too desperate. The betrayal with the rusted warships had only confirmed that belief for the galaxy. But to Ethan, to Laura, and to their growing circle, it was a challenge. If they could rise from this humiliation, if they could build something no one expected, then humanity's place among the stars would be carved not in shame but in strength. Every night, Ethan would walk past the line of rusted ships in the docks. He would place his hand on the cold, flaking metal and whisper, "You thought this would break us." Then he would turn away, eyes fixed on the stars. He imagined a new ship, one so powerful that the galaxy would never again dare to cheat or mock his people. Laura too carried her burden with quiet fire. She remembered the laughter of the alien traders, the way they had counted their credits and sneered at humans. Each memory drove her to work harder, to push her designs further. She dreamed of the day when humanity's own creation would rise from the docks, gleaming not with rust but with strength, and the galaxy would see a side of Earth it had never imagined. The spark of resistance had become a flame. They could not tell the world yet. They could not announce their plan. To most, Earth was still humiliated. But in the shadows, a vow was made. Humanity would no longer be at the mercy of others. Humanity would no longer depend on borrowed strength. They would create their own weapon, their own protector, their own dreadnought. And though it was only the beginning, Ethan and Laura knew one thing with certainty. This dream, once started, would never die. The galaxy had given them shame, but they would answer with fear. And the first whispers of that future already echoed in the silence of the night. The shipyards of Luna were silent in the beginning. Hidden beneath the surface of the moon, the facility had once been a mining station. Now it was guarded by secrecy, known only to a handful of men and women. It was here that humanity would try the impossible. Commander Ethan Cole stood with Dr. Laura Bennett in front of a vast empty dock. The scale of it made even Ethan pause. He could almost hear the echoes of alien laughter in his memory, mocking the rusted ships Earth had been tricked into buying. That laughter was fuel now. It was the reason they would build something greater than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Laura walked across the cold steel floor, her eyes shining with determination. She carried her datapad filled with designs she had worked on night after night. She explained the vision. Massive engines that could outrun any cruiser, armor layered so thick it would shrug off plasma fire, cannons powerful enough to tear through dreadnought hulls. Ethan listened carefully. At first it sounded like madness, but as she spoke, as she showed him the equations and simulations, it became more than a dream. It became a plan. The project was given a name whispered with pride among the small team, Iron Resolve. To them, it was more than just a warship. It was a promise that humanity would never again be mocked, never again be fooled, never again be left defenseless. Every bolt, every rivet, every panel of steel would carry the memory of betrayal and the determination to rise stronger. Work began slowly. Supplies had to be smuggled in piece by piece. They could not let the Galactic Council know. They could not risk spies. Every shipment of ore, every delivery of advanced alloys was disguised as mining exports. The workers labored in silence, knowing they were part of something history would never forget. Ethan walked among the teams, speaking to engineers and technicians, reminding them why they were there. Some were young, eager to prove themselves. Others were veterans, their eyes hard with memories of battles lost against alien fleets. Every one of them carried the same fire. Humanity had been humiliated. Now they would answer. Laura spent long hours in the control centers, her hair tied back, her eyes fixed on glowing blueprints. She fought against failures, systems that collapsed under stress tests, engines that refused to meet her impossible demands. But each failure only hardened her resolve. She would not stop until Iron Resolve became real. At times, Ethan found her asleep at her desk, surrounded by half-finished schematics. He would cover her with a jacket, but he knew she would wake in moments, her mind already racing with new solutions. The ship began to take shape. First came the spine, a towering length of reinforced alloy stretching across the dock like the skeleton of a giant. Workers welded in silence, sparks lighting the darkness. Then the armor plates arrived, thicker than any warship had ever carried. Some said it was too heavy, that it would never fly. But Laura proved them wrong, designing engines that roared with power no one believed humans could achieve. When the first engine test shook the shipyard, even the veterans fell silent. The sound was not like anything they had heard before. It was not the hum of alien cruisers or the whine of fragile frigates. It was a deep, thunderous roar, like the heart of a giant awakening. Ethan felt the vibration through his boots, through his bones, and he smiled for the first time in months. Rumors began to spread. No one knew exactly how, but whispers always found a way into the stars. Traders spoke of Earth building something enormous, something hidden. Some laughed, saying humans could barely keep rusted ships together. Others frowned, uncertain, uneasy. A few scouts tried to investigate the Luna shipyards, but none returned. Their silence only added to the mystery. Inside the dock, progress continued. The ship grew larger, its shadow stretching across the cavern floor. The bridge was installed sleek and functional, every console designed for human hands. Weapons were mounted, rows of plasma cannons and missile bays. But at the center of it, all deep within the hull, was the heart of the Dreadnought, a reactor unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Laura called it the soul of humanity's vengeance. Ethan simply called it power. The workers began to whisper to each other when they looked at the ship. They spoke of how it did not look like alien vessels, which were often curved and elegant. This ship was brutal. It was built like a mountain of steel and fire. It was not meant to impress with beauty. It was meant to terrify with strength. And in those whispers, pride grew. Ethan often stood at the observation deck, staring down at the growing Dreadnought. He thought of the alien traders who had tricked them, who had laughed while pocketing their credits. He thought of the colonies waiting for protection, not knowing if Earth could defend them. He thought of the Council, ashamed and powerless. And then he looked at the iron resolve and felt hope surge inside him. This ship was the answer. Laura joined him sometimes, her tired eyes softening as she looked at the warship. Every plate we weld, every wire we connect, it's one less laugh the galaxy has at our expense, she said. Ethan nodded. For both of them, this was not just a ship. It was humanity's declaration. As months passed, the Dreadnought neared completion. Its engines pulsed with contained fury. Its weapons gleamed in the dim light. And though no one outside their circle had yet seen it, Ethan and Laura knew the truth. The galaxy believed humanity weak, humiliated, broken. But soon, when the iron resolve rose from the docks, they would see the mistake they had made. Humanity was not broken. Humanity was preparing. And in the shadows of the Luna shipyards, a monster of steel and fire was being born, waiting for the day it would awaken and make the galaxy tremble. The galaxy has many voices, and news spreads quickly among them. Traders talk in smoky cantinas, mercenaries whisper in hidden stations, and diplomats share secrets behind closed doors. Soon, a rumor began to move like fire through dry grass. It said that the humans, the same people who had been tricked into buying rusted warships, were building something of their own. At first, everyone laughed. How could humans, so new to the stars, create anything worth fearing? They had been humiliated once already. Surely this was only another desperate attempt to save face, but the whispers did not stop. In fact, they grew louder. In the trade hubs, alien merchants joked about Earth's foolishness, but some of them could not hide unease in their eyes. "They're hiding something in their moon yards," one trader said, his voice low. "I had a man scout there, he never came back." Another scoffed, saying the human defenses must have caught him. But even as he mocked, he tugged nervously at his collar. No one liked it when scouts vanished without a trace. In the grand chambers of the Galactic Council, ambassadors debated the strange silence around the Luna yards. One envoy waved his hand dismissively. "Humans are too young, too inexperienced. They cannot build anything greater than a transport ship." Yet another leaned forward, his voice quiet. "Then why do none of our eyes return once they try to look closer?" council chamber grew tense. Fear was not admitted openly, but it hung in the air like smoke. Meanwhile, in the outer colonies, stories began to change. Miners, settlers, and workers, once ashamed of Earth's weakness, now heard whispers of a massive warship being forged in secret. The shame that had weighed them down began to lighten, replaced by cautious hope. They imagined a ship not made of rust and lies, but of steel and power. For the first time since the betrayal, children in the colonies asked their parents about Earth with pride in their voices. Back on Luna, Ethan Cole stood on the deck of the half-finished Dreadnought. The shipyard lights glowed against the steel plates, making them look like the skin of a beast in the making. Around him, workers moved with purpose. Each carried the same knowledge. The galaxy was laughing at them, but soon that laughter would die. Ethan placed his hand on the cold hull and whispered, "They will learn to fear this name." His words echoed in his heart. Iron resolve. Dr. Laura Bennett, exhausted but relentless, oversaw another test of the main reactor. The roar filled the cavern, shaking the walls, and sparks lit up the chamber. The readings were unstable, but the power output exceeded even her boldest calculations. Her lips curled into a smile. If she could stabilize it, the Dreadnought's heart would outshine every alien reactor in known space. She thought of the traitors who had mocked her people, who had sold them junk. She thought of the colonies left, vulnerable. That memory pushed her to keep going, to pour everything into her work. Beyond the shipyard walls, the galaxy kept mocking. In crowded marketplaces, alien voices spoke with cruel humor. Humans think they can build a dreadnought. What will they use? Rust and duct tape? Laughter always followed. But some of those who laughed also felt a shiver of doubt. Humanity had been underestimated before, and rumors had a strange way of proving true. Mercenaries who once sought to bully human outposts began to hesitate. They remembered the faces of scouts who never returned. They remembered seeing shipments of strange alloys leaving Earth without explanation. More than one warlord decided to wait before testing humanity again. It was not fear yet, not fully, but it was close. Ethan and Laura understood the value of these whispers. They wanted the galaxy to doubt, to worry, to question. They let the rumors grow but never gave proof. The less the galaxy knew, the greater the fear when iron resolve finally revealed itself. Secrecy became their weapon. At night, Ethan would walk the long corridors of the ship, lit only by flickering work lamps. He would imagine it complete, engines roaring, weapons ready. He imagined standing on the bridge as alien fleets trembled before him. The thought made him smile, not from pride, but from justice. Humanity had been laughed at, mocked, treated as weak. That would end soon. Laura, in her workshop, fell asleep with schematics glowing above her, only to wake and continue again. She carried in her mind the picture of the galaxy's faces when they first saw the Dreadnought. They expected weakness. Instead, they would see steel and fire. That thought kept her alive through the endless hours. The galaxy, for all its arrogance, did not yet understand what was coming. They thought they had tricked humanity into silence. They thought Earth would crawl back into the shadows, licking its wounds. But in the hidden shipyards of Luna, the future was being built piece by piece. A monster of steel, a weapon of vengeance, a shield for the colonies. The whispers of fear were still only whispers, but they were growing louder. The laughter of alien traitors was beginning to sound nervous. The debates in the council chambers were no longer filled with mockery alone, but with worry. The colonies, once ashamed, now held their heads higher. And in the shadows, where no one could see, the iron resolve waited, its hull gleaming in the artificial light, its heart beating stronger with each passing day. What began as humiliation had become hope. What began as betrayal had become determination. The galaxy still laughed, but in the corners of their voices, fear was already creeping in. And soon, when the Dreadnought awakened, that fear would turn to silence. The day came when hiding was no longer an option. For months, the whispers of a secret human project had moved across the galaxy, but most still thought it was only a rumor. Then one evening, Alarms blared across the outer colonies. A coalition fleet appeared at the edge of human space. These were not friendly ships. They were predators, drawn by weakness. They claimed humanity owed debts, claimed Earth had no right to its colonies, and demanded surrender. If the humans refused, the aliens promised destruction. Commander Ethan Cole stood on the command deck of Luna Base, watching the fleets approach on the large display. Cruisers, frigates, carriers, the coalition had sent a force far larger than anything humanity had ever faced. The council members panicked. Some wanted to beg, others to offer payment, even though humanity had nothing left to give. Ethan said nothing for a long time. He only stared at the screen. Then, with a calm voice, he spoke. It's time. Deep beneath the surface, inside the massive hidden docks, the Iron Resolve stirred for the first time. The great Dreadnought had been finished only days before. Its engines had roared in testing, its cannons aligned, its reactor humming with endless power. But it had never faced battle. Many still doubted it could. Now there was no choice. It was fight, or humanity would be erased. Dr. Laura Bennett stood beside Ethan as they entered the bridge of the Dreadnought. She could feel the vibration of the engines under her feet, like the heartbeat of some giant creature. Her hands trembled, but not with fear. This was the moment she had lived for, worked for, sacrificed everything for. She whispered to herself, "Don't fail us now." As the coalition fleet advanced, they opened fire first. Brilliant streams of plasma and missiles cut through space, lighting the darkness with deadly color. The council screamed through comms for surrender. Ethan ignored them. He gave only one order: shields up. For the first time, the Dreadnought's shield grid came alive. A blue-white shimmer wrapped around the ship as the alien fire struck it. The impact was deafening inside the hull, but the shields held. Where the rusted relics had crumbled, Iron Resolve stood unshaken. The crew looked at each other with wide eyes. Humanity had taken the first blow and survived. Ethan's voice was steady, cold. Return fire. Laura activated the targeting systems. The main cannons glowed with energy. Then, with a sound like thunder rolling through space, they fired. A plasma bolt struck an enemy cruiser head-on. The alien ship, proud and mocking only minutes ago, shattered in an instant. The wreck spun apart, fire spilling into the void. Silence filled the human bridge for a heartbeat. Then it was broken by gasps of disbelief. They had done it. Humanity had destroyed a galactic warship with a single shot. The coalition fleet hesitated. They had expected a broken people, ships made of rust and shame. Instead, before them stood a monster built of steel and fury. They regrouped quickly and opened fire with everything they had. Dozens of blasts rained down, enough to tear apart a small fleet. But Iron Resolve pushed forward, shields sparking but unbroken. Ethan gripped the armrest of his command chair. His heart pounded, but his face stayed calm. Keep firing. The Dreadnought answered again and again. Plasma cannons roared. Missile bays unleashed storms of fire, and railguns tore through alien armor like paper. Each shot ripped holes in the coalition fleet. What had begun as an easy victory for the aliens was turning into a slaughter. Ships exploded one after another, debris floating across the stars. The coalition captains, so confident only minutes ago, now shouted in panic across their comms. On Earth, in the colonies, millions watched the broadcast. At first, they had feared another humiliation. They expected their fleets to be torn apart, their worlds to be lost. But as they saw the Dreadnought advancing, as they saw alien ships burning, hope returned like a flood. Children who had been taught to be ashamed of being human now cheered at the screens. Families wept, not from fear but from pride. Humanity was no longer weak. Humanity was fighting back. One by one, the coalition ships broke formation. Some tried to flee, their engines glowing as they ran. Others fought desperately, but the Dreadnought cut them down. When the last carrier tried to retreat, Ethan gave one final order. End it. The Iron Resolve's main cannon fired once more, splitting the carrier in two. Then silence fell. The battlefield, once filled with fire and death, was quiet. All that remained was the human Dreadnought, standing alone among the wreckage of its enemies. The crew erupted in cheers, their voices shaking the walls of the bridge. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over him. He thought of the shame, the betrayal, the laughter of alien traitors. He thought of the broken, rusted ship sitting useless in the docks. And now he thought of the galaxy watching, realizing the mistake they had made. Laura leaned against her console, her face glowing with sweat and relief. "We did it," she whispered. Ethan looked at her, then at the stars beyond the shattered fleet. His voice was low, but it carried through the entire bridge. No, humanity did it. And so, in that battle, the Dreadnought proved itself. What began as a cruel trick had ended in fire and victory. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they were not prey, not fools, not weak. They had built their own strength. They had survived the test by fire. And now, for the first time, it was not humans who trembled, it was the galaxy. The battle was over, but the echo of it traveled far beyond the wreckage. Across the galaxy, from the richest trade stations to the poorest mining colonies, everyone was talking about the same thing. The humans had unleashed a monster. The coalition, fleet that had attacked them, a fleet built from old powers with centuries of history, was gone, and the one responsible was a ship the galaxy had never heard of before. A human Dreadnought called Iron Resolve. At first, many refused to believe it. Rumors had spread before about humanity building something new, but they were always dismissed as lies or dreams. Now the evidence was floating in the void. The broken shells of alien cruisers, the shattered hulls of carriers, the silence of fleets that once mocked Earth. The proof was undeniable. Humanity, the same species that had been cheated with rusted ships, had struck back and won. In the trade hubs, merchants whispered nervously. Only weeks before, they had laughed at humans, selling them scraps and calling them desperate. Now their voices shook as they talked about the Dreadnought. "They destroyed an entire fleet," one trader said, fear in his tone. "Not just held them back, destroyed them." Another shook his head in disbelief. How could a young species build such power so quickly? No one had an answer, and that silence was more frightening than the truth. The news reached the colonies too. Families that once felt ashamed of being human now stood proud again. Children drew pictures of the Dreadnought, imagining it flying above their homes, protecting them. In crowded streets, people shouted the ship's name, Iron Resolve. It became more than a weapon. It became a symbol, a reminder that humanity could not only survive in the galaxy, but also rise above it. On Luna, inside the great shipyards where the Dreadnought had been built, the crew celebrated. For months, they had worked in secrecy, tired, afraid, unsure if their creation would even function. Now they had seen it fight, seen it stand against enemies who thought humans were weak. Commander Ethan Cole walked among them, his presence steady and calm. Everywhere he went, the workers cheered. They knew that their sweat and sacrifices had built the ship that changed everything. Dr. Laura Bennett was not cheering. She was smiling, but her mind was already racing. She sat at her console in the engineering bay, staring at the reactor's readouts. It had held through the battle, but only just. There were flaws still, improvements to be made. She knew the galaxy would not stop with one attack. Others would come, and they would come stronger. Humanity had won this battle, but war was rarely so simple. She whispered to herself, "We can make it even better." Meanwhile, the leaders of other species sat in their councils and chambers trembling. For so long they had looked down on Earth, calling it a young world with no power. But now the humans had built a Dreadnought in secret, a ship so powerful it had shattered fleets that should have crushed them. If they could do this after being betrayed, what would they build next? Fear settled in their hearts. Some demanded alliances with humanity, desperate to be on their side. Others argued that humanity must be contained before they grew too strong. but none dared to move quickly. The memory of the Iron Resolve's guns tearing through cruisers was too fresh. Ethan and his crew understood this fear, and they used it. They made no boastful speeches to the galaxy, no threats or demands. Instead, they let silence speak for them. That silence was heavier than words. The galaxy filled in the gaps with its own imagination. Rumors grew. Some said humanity was building a second Dreadnought. Others claimed they had weapons even more dangerous hidden away. No one knew the truth, but the fear was real. On Earth, the people no longer spoke with shame about the rusted ships that had once humiliated them. Instead, they spoke of resilience. They told stories of how humanity had taken betrayal and turned it into power. Fathers told their children about Ethan Cole, the commander who never bent. Mothers told them about Laura Bennett, the engineer who gave humanity a weapon when no one else would. And everywhere they spoke the name Iron Resolve. The traitors who once mocked Earth now avoided human ports. Mercenaries thought twice before raiding human colonies. Even the most arrogant alien captains paused when their navigators mentioned routes near Earth's space. Fear had taken root. Humanity had not just defended itself. They had changed how the galaxy looked at them. On the bridge of the Dreadnought, Ethan stood before his crew. The lights of distant stars reflected on the polished steel around them. He could feel the weight of what they had done. He spoke quietly, but every word carried strength. "We showed them today that humanity will not be broken," he said. "They gave us rust, and we answered with fire. They tried to trick us, and we answered with strength. Remember this moment because it is not the end. It is only the beginning." The crew cheered, their voices rising until they filled the ship. Laura stood beside him, her eyes shining. For her, it was not just victory. It was proof. Proof that humanity did not need to rely on others. Proof that they could create greatness with their own hands. Far across the galaxy, leaders and traitors sat awake at night, thinking of that same ship. They thought of its thick armor, its powerful shields, its devastating weapons. They thought of the silence that followed the coalition fleet's destruction. And in their hearts, one truth burned. Humanity was no longer a weak, desperate species. Humanity was now something new, something dangerous. The galaxy had given Earth betrayal and laughter. In return, Earth had given the galaxy fear. And fear, once born, does not die easily. In the great halls of the Galactic Council, fear had a way of changing the air. What once was filled with mocking voices and laughter now carried only whispers. The alien ambassadors who once enjoyed telling jokes about humans now sat stiff in their chairs, glancing at one another with unease. The destruction of the coalition fleet by the human Dreadnought Iron Resolve was not just a victory, it was a warning. A young species had built a warship that rivaled, and even surpassed, the greatest ships of the old powers. That was something the galaxy had never expected, and it made them tremble. One council member, a tall alien with skin like polished stone, slammed his hand on the table. "We must act," he growled. "If we do nothing, the humans will build more of these machines. Imagine if they spread across their colonies, or worse, began selling them. The balance of power will shatter." His words echoed, but no one immediately agreed. Another ambassador, with scales shimmering in the chamber's light, leaned forward slowly. "Act against them? Did you not see the wreckage of the coalition fleet? Did you not hear the cries of captains begging for retreat? The humans are not to be underestimated again. To attack them now is suicide." The room broke into chaos. Some shouted for sanctions, demanding that humanity be blocked from receiving resources. Others insisted on sending spies, desperate to learn how Earth had built such a dreadnought so quickly. A few whispered of war, but their voices faded when they remembered the sight of a single human ship standing tall, while dozens of theirs were reduced to ash. Fear chained their tongues. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the news of victory spread like wildfire. Cities that had once hung their heads in shame now lit up with celebration. Crowds filled the streets, chanting the name of the Dreadnought. Flags waved and songs were sung about a new age for humanity. The colonies joined too, sending messages of pride and hope. For the first time, humans looked to the stars not with fear of being prey, but with the pride of being equals. On the Iron Resolve, Ethan Cole walked the bridge in silence, watching the galaxy map shimmer across the main screen. He saw the borders of alien empires and the trade routes that stretched across the stars. But what he saw most clearly were the cracks forming in their unity. The aliens feared humanity now, and fear made them divided. Ethan understood this better than anyone. He turned to his crew, his face calm but his eyes burning with determination. "They will try to contain us," he said. "They will whisper and plot, but they will not dare face us directly. Not after what we did." Dr. Laura Bennett listened from her station, her hands still resting on the console. She had been receiving encrypted reports from contacts across the colonies. Merchants, miners, even smugglers sent word of how alien traders had begun avoiding human routes, too afraid of what ships might be waiting. Laura smiled faintly at the thought. "They don't just fear our dreadnought," she whispered to herself. "They fear what it means. They fear that humanity is no longer a child." The Council's fear grew every day. Ambassadors argued in circles, but none could agree on how to handle the humans. One night, in a private meeting chamber, a group of the most powerful species gathered. "We must find out how they built it," one said. "Perhaps it was stolen technology." Another shook his head. "No, it was theirs. I have seen the design. Too crude, too brutal for our style. It is human through and through." The silence that followed was heavy. They all understood the truth. If humans could build one dreadnought, they could build more. And if they built more, the galaxy's old empires would lose the power they had clung to for centuries. Out in the colonies, the people were already dreaming bigger. Small children spoke of becoming engineers to work on the next great ship. Soldiers who once feared alien fleets now volunteered eagerly, ready to serve on dreadnought crews. Humanity's humiliation had turned into the strongest weapon of all: belief. They believed they were no longer weak, no longer prey. And belief, once born, could not easily be broken. Ethan knew this. He also knew the danger. The galaxy would not accept humanity's rise quietly. He stood with Laura on the viewing deck of the Dreadnought, the stars shining brightly beyond the glass. "We shook them," he said softly. "Now they will decide. Some will come to us as allies. Others will plot to bring us down. But they all know the truth. They cannot ignore us anymore." Laura nodded, her eyes on the stars. "And they will never trick us again." In the council chambers, the debates raged on. Some pushed for alliances, hoping to bring humans into their circle before they grew too strong. Others whispered about building larger fleets, desperate to prepare for the day humans revealed another secret weapon. And in every word, in every motion, fear was present. The fear of a young race that had been underestimated, betrayed, and mocked, only to rise higher than anyone thought possible. The Iron Resolve sat in orbit, its hull gleaming in the light of the sun. To humanity, it was a symbol of strength and pride. To the galaxy, it was a shadow looming over their futures. The Council could not agree on what to do, but one truth echoed in every chamber, every port, every hidden corner of the stars. The humans were no longer to be laughed at. They were to be feared. And as that fear spread, so too did the legend of the Dreadnought. A legend of steel and fire, built from betrayal, carried by anger, and born to change the galaxy forever. The Council could argue all they wanted, but deep down every ambassador already knew. Humanity had claimed its place among the stars, and nothing could take it away. The Iron Resolve drifted in the silence of space, its massive hull glowing faintly, under the light of distant stars. For weeks after the Great Battle, it had become more than just a warship. To humanity, it was a symbol of survival, pride, and strength. To the rest of the galaxy, it was a nightmare, a reminder that the species they once mocked had risen higher than anyone expected. But for Commander Ethan Cole, the Dreadnought was more than steel and weapons. It was a promise. He stood on the deck, his eyes moving across the rows of young officers and engineers at their stations. They were tired, their faces marked with sleepless nights, but their spirits were unbroken. Every man and woman here had fought not just with weapons but with belief. They had believed that humanity could rise again, and together they had proven it. Ethan's voice carried across the ship's comms. They thought they could break us with lies. They thought they could bury us in shame. But humanity does not break. Humanity builds. Humanity rises. His words echoed through the steel corridors, stirring every crew member. Dr. Laura Bennett stood beside him, her eyes glimmering as she listened. For her, the iron resolve was not just a machine. It was her life's work. The proof that human hands and human minds could create something the galaxy had never seen before. She remembered the endless nights of design, the frustration, the failures. She remembered the laughter of the alien traders who sold them scraps, thinking Earth would stay weak forever. Now those same traders whispered in fear at the mention of the Dreadnought. That thought made her heart steady. In the colonies, the news of the battle continued to spread. Children played games where they pretended to be Dreadnought captains, shouting orders and firing imaginary cannons. Families spoke proudly of Earth, telling stories of Ethan and Laura as if they were legends already. The shame of the rusted warships was gone. In its place stood pride so strong it touched every corner of human space. People no longer said, "We were tricked." Now they said, "We answered." Beyond human borders, the Galactic Council remained divided. Some species wanted peace with humanity, desperate to form alliances before it was too late. Others wanted control, speaking of sanctions and limits, but their voices shook with fear. None dared to send another fleet. Not yet. The memory of the coalition's destruction was too fresh, too painful. They had seen one human dreadnought turn dozens of their ships into fire. If humans could build one, they could build more. That thought alone was enough to keep even the proudest empires silent. Ethan knew this silence would not last forever. The galaxy would not allow humanity to rise without challenge. But he also knew something more powerful. Humanity was ready now. They were no longer alone, no longer helpless. They had proven that when pushed, they could create wonders. He looked at Laura and spoke softly, meant only for her. This ship is not just for war. It is a message. It tells the galaxy that we will never be prey again. Laura smiled faintly. Then let's make sure they never forget it. On the EC observation deck, the crew gathered as Ethan made his final vow. The stars stretched endlessly outside, distant and cold, but to the humans watching they looked closer than ever. "We will remember their betrayal," Ethan said. "We will remember how they mocked us, how they laughed at our weakness, and we will remember how we answered. With fire, with steel, with resolve. Let this ship stand as proof that no one tricks humanity without paying the price. Let the galaxy know that we will endure, and when forced, we will rise higher than any of them imagined." The crew erupted in cheers, their voices filling every chamber of the Dreadnought. The sound was more than celebration. It was defiance, a roar of pride that reached beyond Luna's shipyards, beyond Earth and into the stars. Every officer, every engineer, every worker who had touched the Dreadnought felt the same truth. Humanity had stepped into a new age. The iron resolve turned slowly, its engines flaring like suns. To the outside world it looked like a predator, a beast of steel moving through the darkness. To humans, it looked like hope. Wherever it went, enemies would hesitate. Allies would take notice and the galaxy would whisper in awe. No longer would humans be underestimated. No longer would they be treated as weak. The age of humiliation was over. In the days that followed, new plans began. Other shipyards were quietly prepared, resources redirected, engineers recruited. The iron resolve was the first, but it would not be the last. Humanity would never again depend on scraps from alien hands. They would build their own path with their own strength. For now, though, The Dreadnought drifted silently, like a guardian watching over its people. The stars around it gleamed faintly, as if bowing to the presence of something greater. Ethan placed his hand on the railing and whispered a final thought, one meant for the galaxy itself. You gave us rust, we gave you fear. Remember this because humanity never forgets. And so, the story of the Dreadnought spread. A story born from betrayal, forged in secrecy, proven in battle, and carried forward by pride. The galaxy had once laughed at humanity. Now it feared them. And in that fear, humanity found its place among the stars, not as beggars or fools, but as equals, and perhaps one day as leaders. The iron resolve had spoken for them all, and its voice was clear. Humanity was here to stay,